Hi, this is Mac of Mac's List. Find Your Dream Job is presented by Mac's List, an online community where you can find free resources for your job search, plus online courses and books that help you advance your career. My latest book is called Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. It's a reference guide for your career that covers all aspects of the job search, including expert advice in every chapter. You can get the first chapter for free by visiting maxlist.org/anywhere. This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm Mac Pritchard, your host and publisher of Mac's List. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Ben Forstag, Becky Thomas, and Jessica Black from the Mac's List team. This week, we're talking about why you're not getting a second interview. You have an interview for a job you want. Several weeks go by. An email arrives from the employer, but instead of offering a second interview, a message says you're no longer a candidate. This week's guest expert is recruiter Will Thomson. He says many candidates make a few common mistakes that disqualify them in a first interview. Will and I talk about these deal breakers later in the show. There are some questions you should never ask in a job interview, no matter whether it's your first or final conversation. Ben has found a list of 11 of these questions. He'll tell us more in a moment. How do you describe your skills and qualifications from a past job in ways that will excite and attract future employers? That's our question of the week. It comes from listener Rick Bella in Medford, Oregon. Becky shares her advice in a moment. As always, let's first check in with the Mac's List team, and first up is Ben Forstag, who's out there every week searching the nooks and crannies of the internet. He's looking for tools, books, websites, and other resources you can use in your job search and your career. So Ben, what have you uncovered for our listeners this week?
From the nooks and crannies of the internet.
Yes,
I bring you
dark recesses. Steady, Ben.
I bring you a resource from fastcompany.com, and this is an article entitled, Never Say These 11 Things During a Job Interview Unless You Don't Want the Job. Now, I'm not going to read all 11 things you shouldn't say, but instead I thought I'd turn this into a little bit of a game. So I'm going to say one of the things you shouldn't say, and I want the staff here to tell me why this is not a good thing to say. You savvy?
Okay.
Sure, let's play.
So,
lean in.
Number one, this is an easy one. You should never say, quote, I don't have any questions for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a no-brainer. Like, you have to have questions prepared.
Yeah,
But
that
why?
shows that you've done your research and that you're interested in the job and that you're a quick on-your-toes thinker. And
it's your opportunity to, like, fill in the gaps of the questions that they asked you, like give you an opportunity to like speak to one of your like key skills that you really want them to know about. Mm-hmm. It gives you an opportunity to do the job in the interview, start that two-way dialogue. Like there's so many good things about that. That's like my favorite part of the interview.
Yeah, every candidate wants to stand out, but this is one thing you don't want to stand out for because you don't want to be the only candidate who doesn't ask a question.
That's right.
It's
really
all
important.
your competitors will be doing.
It looks lazy.
Yeah.
Okay, great job, guys. Here's one that's a little bit
Keep
Keep us
tougher.
moving, Ben. Keep us moving.
One that's a little tougher. Don't say this, quote, my last boss was terrible.
Well, another no-brainer. You don't want to, number one, you don't want to burn any bridges because maybe this current employer knows that past employer, but also, number one, it makes you look really negative and like you have a hard time getting along with people, or it brings the focus back onto you rather than there's just no reason to say it. You can
in a negative way.
You can talk about phrase it in a different way of, you know, we had differences of opinion and it, blah blah blah, but always bring it back to a positive however you need to.
Yeah. And like if you say that to a potential employer, they're going to imagine you saying that about them sometime.
Absolutely.
And they don't want to hear somebody trash talking them, like, of course. So it's just a bad idea.
Yeah, it's a deal breaker. This is instantly will disqualify you with most employers.
It also makes you sound gossipy and like you're just stirring up trouble.
Okay, so you hit the first two out of the park. The third one, this is the curveball, though. You ready? Don't ever say this. Quote, "That's a really nice watch you have on."
Oh, that's not hard.
Why? What if it is a nice watch? What if it's a cute watch? I love complimenting people on their jewels and things.
But the question is, why shouldn't you?
I know. I don't know.
Well, I get what both of you are saying. I understand that it's nice to compliment people, but I also see the reason why I assume this is on this list is that it looks like you are talking about the material, the like financial aspect of things of like, oh, can't you afford this really
like
nice watch? And it's like a digging
like
into that part. That's what I assume.
Like a subtle, like, you must make a lot of money.
Or something in like bringing the financial part up.
Or that's a really nice swatch you've got on there. You must not make much at all. Mac, any thoughts?
I instinctively shy away from any comments about people's clothing, a personal appearance in a professional setting.
Is that because you're a man?
It might be. Let's explore that. I was
just curious. I'm not trying to bring that into the fold, but I think that like women, that's ingrained into us to comment on other people's
it's like I
jewelry
like
or your
necklace.
scarf or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that it's not as acceptable for men to do that, and it's also not as ingrained in what you've been brought up to do.
That's probably true. Yeah.
Yeah. I try to always use a gender neutral approach.
Sure.
I'll never say mom or dad. I'll say parent. And so I just instinctively, I haven't been formally trained in this, but just think it's always a good idea to concentrate on the work and not on people's appearance.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the authors of this article basically say the same thing. Without the gender issue inserted into it. Their take is like you shouldn't be overly
focused on the material.
Yeah, you shouldn't be flattering people overly because people like get that you're just doing that to make a good impression. But I think probably behind that is also like you want to avoid some of these kind of physical appearance, obviously, but also like attire, how people dress, how people act, things like that. Keep it completely within the framework of the job at hand here, not the person you're talking to, for example.
So could I ask a question before I know we have to wrap up, Ben, but I want to ask that's a great question remark. Can we talk about why that's bad? Because I feel like that's an acceptable way of kind of allowing yourself to have a pause to think about things. And that's actually, I don't know if they're ordered in any sort of way, but that's number one on this list of.
Oh, so the first question.
That's a great question that you should never say. And so I know that I have said that multiple times.
I've said it a lot, Jessica.
Always. And
it's a good way to buy time.
That's a good way for me to like process.
I use it.
Absolutely.
To
and so
buy time.
I'm wondering why that is a bad, and maybe you don't have the answer, but why? Let's talk about it.
Maybe that's because the employer knows you're just trying to buy time.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so first of all, let me just say this. Just about every article written on the internet, most of them are opinion pieces and people are sharing kind of their opinions, and some opinions are empirically more true than others, or I guess that's a nice way to say it.
Like ours?
Exactly. No, so, this is one where I wouldn't agree necessarily. It's an awful thing to say. I think if you need a second to think about things, it's probably better to say, give me just a second to think about that rather than that's a great question, because that's a great question is flattery that buys you time rather than just being direct about it.
Right.
But even so, I don't think that's like an awful crime.
I do too. And not to sort of use that as a crutch, because you could say that after every question and then that becomes kind of annoying. And in Toastmasters, they tell you to repeat the question back as like a way to process rather than saying that's a great question. Anyway.
Yeah.
I like
that.
And,
there's another one here on this list that I wouldn't actually include if I had written it, which is I don't know. I actually think there's a lot of power in saying I don't know to a question
instead of making something up. Yeah,
it's better to say I don't know, but give me a day and I'll get back to you with an answer on that. Like, let me go do some research and figure out the information I don't know so I can tell you. Obviously, you have to be strategic about how you say that, but I think it's so much better to admit you don't know something up front and give a time frame for getting an answer than just making something up.
Yeah, and I like your focus on using that in a way that you don't know the answer right now, but you are going to, you're actionary in that, and not just I don't know, like move on and let me off the hook kind of a thing, because that's probably what they mean in this context of don't just say I don't know and then expect.
Sure. So if you want to see the full list of 11 things you shouldn't say, and I guess measure them against your own sense of empirical wisdom, truth, capital T, you can do so. It's on fastcompany.com, and we will have the link in the show notes.
All right. Good list. Now let's turn to Becky. But before we do that, please remember that if you've got a question for Ben, he would love to hear from you. His address is ben@maxlist.org. And we would love to share your idea on the show. But let's turn back to you, our listeners. And Becky, you've got a question for us in the Max List mailbag this week. And tell us, what is it?
This week's question comes from Rick Bella of Medford, Oregon. It's a quick one, but it's a little complicated. So he writes, how do I translate my qualifications and experience from the jargon of the last job to something a prospective employer can appreciate? So I relate to this. I work in marketing. There's a lot of crazy titles and sort of different understandings of what someone's job title is, and it varies a lot depending on where you're working, what sort of industry you're in, all kinds of different things, right? So if you're in a job at wherever you're working, and you've sort of got like 3 different things that you do, and you've got sort of a unique title that doesn't exist anywhere else, like how do you translate that, all that work and all those skills that you have to something that a new employer, a new person who has never worked with you before, has never heard of your current job title?
Right.
How do you sort of tell them what you do in a succinct way that also like speaks to their needs? Especially
some of those forward-thinking organizations like Airbnb or places like that have really fun-sounding titles.
There's a lot of like customer delight officers,
right?
And stuff.
It's like, what exactly does that mean, and how do you translate that?
Right.
Yeah, that's a great question.
So I heard a great job title today. Someone who works with TEDxPortland, and their colleague was saying that they work with the chief curator of TEDxPortland. Yes, and chief
TEDx
curator.
has a lot of fun names.
Yeah, I know you're involved in TEDxMtHood.
I am. Yeah. Yes. Fun titles, which is always good. But also, chief curator, what is that? Someone from the outside doesn't know what that means.
Yeah. So I think there's 2 things to think about here. One is sort of like what your professional brand is and how you communicate that just in general, whether you're like looking for a specific job or you just, you have to be clear about like who you are and what you do, so that if somebody stumbles upon you on LinkedIn or your personal website or something, that they can understand what you do. So, and then the other part is if you are looking to apply for a specific job, looking at a specific company and trying to figure out if you can sort of translate your experience to this new job title, this new company. And I think for both of those pieces, it's really important to focus on what you can do and the value that you add, no matter what your employer is. So I think that when you think about how you describe your experience and your qualifications, you're going to want to use examples and sort of show the actions that you've taken, like the projects that you've been able to complete, the progress that you've made for your past employer, to show the like tactical skills that you have. And then that will make it easier for a prospective employer to understand you, right? It's sort of that transferable skills piece, but I think it's more here about using clear language
Yep.
and using like examples.
Absolutely. That's exactly
Yeah.
what I was going to say is boil it down to the essence of exactly what you do and don't get caught up in the jargon. And, you can still
just try to remove as much jargon as you can.
Yeah, and you can use that if you are in an industry where the jargon is going to be relatable. But for anything else, boil it down and explain it as if you're explaining it to a 5-year-old. Make
Yeah.
it as easy as possible for anyone who's not in that industry, especially if you're coming from a highly technical job or industry. You want to make sure that you are explaining exactly what you do and can do in the most approachable way and clear way. I think that's great
Right.
advice.
Yeah. And so really just like being able to define yourself as a professional, talk about your value, talk about the things that you've done for past employers and how you've been able to do them. And then when you do find a job that you want to apply for, look at that employer's problems, like read through the job description, try to understand what they need, and then take those basic parts of your skills and experience and apply those to the prospective employer's needs and customize to that. So hopefully that helps. Do you guys have any other thoughts?
No other thoughts on my side.
No, I think you nailed it. And
Yeah, that's great.
I really like your emphasis on thinking about the employer's needs and going back to the job posting, because that gives you insights into their thoughts and they're going to, and that's how they think.
Yeah.
I remember we had a guest a couple months ago who talked about how you could describe what you do to others. And one of her piece of advice was start with like, so when X
Christina
does
Cantors,
Y.
wasn't it?
Maybe.
I think it was.
And it was
Yeah.
like basically give people like a very concrete example of the problem they would find in the real world, and then
Right.
describe what your role in fixing that is.
Super relatable.
Yeah, and that's not the greatest piece of advice for like translating your skills on a resume per se, but I think it's a good way of thinking about how you could talk about your skill set, especially if you've got like really esoteric or niche skills to begin with.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because Christina's topic, and correct me if I have it wrong, Jessica, but I think it was how to explain what you do for a living.
I think so. I think it was,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
We'll share it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was she did a great job of explaining it in a very clear way as well.
She's a great coach on that and other topics. Well, thanks for the excellent advice, and thank you, Rick, for your question. If you've got a question for Becky, please send her an email. Her address is becky@maxlist.org. And you can also call her listener line. That number is area code 716-JOB-TALK, or send us a message on the MaxList Facebook page. If we use your question on the show, we'll send you a copy of Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. And we'll be back in just a moment. When we return, I'll talk with this week's guest expert, Will Thomson, about why you're not getting that second interview. We've been making Find Your Dream Job for more than 2 years now, and it's about time we got to know you, our listeners, even better. I really want to know, what do you like about our show? What do you think we should change? And what's the one topic that you wish we'd cover? Our first ever listener survey is live now through February 28th, 2018, and you can take it at maxlist.org/podcast survey. It'll take you less than 5 minutes to complete, and you'll be entered to win one of 3 $50 Amazon gift cards. So take a few minutes right now to complete our survey. Go to maxlist.org/podcast survey. We'll also include that URL in the show notes. And thank you. Now let's turn to this week's guest expert, Will Thomson. Will Thomson is the founder and president of Bullseye Recruiting. His agency's clients have included Dell, eBay, and Rosetta Stone. Will has a passion for helping people find their dream jobs and organizations grow their sales teams. He also blogs regularly about careers, and his company's website has received 20 international awards. Will joins us today from Austin, Texas. Will, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I appreciate it.
Well, it's a pleasure. And this week's topic is one I think we've all had to deal with. And I'm talking, Will, about second interviews. And I think we've all been there where we've gone in, we've had a great conversation with a hiring manager, we're excited, we go home, and we're waiting for that call or email inviting us to come back, and then we get that note saying, sorry, we're moving on with other candidates. Will, you work so often with both candidates and companies. What are the common mistakes that you see people make in that first interview that might lead them to not getting a call back to continue the conversation?
One of the things that happens the most frequently is when people did not do the research on the company and the role. So in 2017 and going into 2018, it is very much a candidate's marketplace. And you have to remember, as much as you are evaluating them, they have multiple interviews as well, and they are interviewing you. And people forget that because there's so many opportunities out there that you're actually thinking that they should be jumping all over you. So the one thing I want you to think about, I don't know if you remember this song back in, and I'm going to date myself a little bit, Mac, but I Want You to Want Me by Cheap Trick. That's something you have to realize that you have to walk out of there thinking, I want you to want me. And I think a lot of people don't think about things like asking them basic questions like, what's your latest round of funding? And knowing information about that, or knowing about the newest product release, or understanding the leadership within the organization, understanding what their Glassdoor ranking is, asking questions around that. Knowing about competition, knowing about the role and how you could impact or the position they're trying to fill. That's really important.
And first, let me just say, I do remember Cheap Trick, and I did have the album live at Budokan, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And I don't think you're dating yourself at all, though I think I'm probably dating myself. I love your emphasis here, Will, on research. Do you have a rule of thumb? If somebody's going in for that first interview and say, you've been asked to set aside 30 minutes for a conversation with a hiring manager, how much time do you recommend generally that a candidate invest in that interview? How much homework should they do? An hour, 2 hours?
Well, as much as it takes. I mean, you could be sitting on your couch, scrolling through Netflix, and it could be an hour, it could be 2 hours, depending on how interested you are in the role. I mean, you really have to sell yourself. So, going and Googling this kind of information is important. And if you don't do this research, they're going to feel like you're not interested in them at all. So it's important to spend at least an hour of research. Even if it's just a 30-minute call, that way you are as prepared as you possibly can. Be prepared with questions. People like talking about themselves and the company, and if you can get them talking about their company, then it makes the interview go a heck of a lot easier.
Yeah, I'm sure you've heard this as well. For people who I've read books about conversation where the author will advise you to ask lots of questions of whether it's a mixer or a business meeting, and people will say who are in the receiving end of those questions later often, gosh, he or she was such a brilliant conversationalist, and they say that because you're asking questions about them and their interests, and as you say, people love to have the limelight focused on them.
They've invested their time and effort in the company, so they want to make sure that you have the same passion for the role as they have for the passion for their company. So that's important to sell yourself.
Now, what about, I know you've identified some other common errors out there. One of them is inflexibility. Tell us more about that, Will.
Yeah, so I was telling you this story the other day, but so when I was right out of college, and my first job, I remember I was working at a recruiting agency called Aerotech, and I made a low salary, and I wore a pressed white shirt and a tie and a jacket every single day to work. And that I did it, and I did it happily because that's what I wanted to do to make money and to advance my career. As you get older throughout your career, you become more and more inflexible on what you will and will not do. And sometimes you're going to have to do things that you don't want to do. Like I wouldn't want to go put on a tie or wear a jacket every single day. But if it would help me get ahead in my career, then I would. Some things that people say is, I have to work from home. That's absolutely bottom line. I have a life at home. Well, maybe don't look at it as that's the only thing you'll do. People will look at you and say, other people will work in the office, so you're going to eliminate yourself. Or let's just say, I need to make $90,000 a year. Well, remember, you have to be flexible in your salary expectations, especially if you've been outside of the workforce for a while and trying to rejoin the workforce. You may have to take a step back to go ahead. And then, in sales, I hear a lot of things like, I want to only be an account manager. I don't really want to sell. Well, for a sales recruiter, and that's what I do, that's disheartening because everyone sells. If you're a lawyer, if you're a dentist or a chiropractor, you can't just manage. Or just saying, I want to be a manager in general. Well, it takes a little while to be a manager. So you have to think about those things and not be so inflexible. Things like, I won't relocate. Well, maybe for the perfect opportunity, it'd be good for you and your family to at least look at those things or have those conversations. But that inflexibility really causes a problem when you're in the interview process.
I agree with you about the importance of flexibility. We all have a list. For some, it might be longer or shorter than others of things that are non-negotiable. How do you recommend, Will, that people get clear about that? So when they say, no, I don't want to do this, it's really something that matters, and they leave the door open for things that maybe they're not crazy about doing, but they might have to do because it's a job. How do you see candidates sort that out?
Well, one thing I always did is make a list of things that I will and will not do and will maybe do. And there are certain things that I won't do, but there's some things that I don't want to do, but I will do. So once you kind of have that outlined, you know what kind of jobs you're going to go after. And then you'll know that when you go after certain jobs, some of these jobs that you want may have the stuff in the maybe column. Talk it over with your spouse or significant other, or if it's just you, then really spend some time. But really try to decide what those maybes are, and then keep an open mind about it. If there's certain things that you just can't do and you won't do, that's okay. It depends on where you are in your career and what you're able to accomplish, though.
Yeah, so again, I'm hearing you return to the theme of preparation and homework and having covered some basics before you either pick up that phone for a phone screener or walk into the room for that first interview.
That's correct. You have to be prepared and you have to be ready to interview. And a lot of people will call me and say, I want a job. I've been out of work for a while, and I'll ask them, well, what do you want to do? And they really don't even know where to begin. So I think doing your homework on what kind of industries and what kind of jobs you're looking to do is very important before you even go talk to an employer or a prospective employer, because you are really wasting their time and yours if you don't have an idea. So research is important.
What about employment gaps? Will, I know in our conversation before the show, you identified this as an area where candidates trip up. Why is this a concern in first interviews, and how should candidates prepare to talk about those?
So in 2018, there are going to be gaps in your employment. It's not a matter of if there are going to be gaps, it's going to be a matter of when. So I talked to a guy the other day, today actually, and he said, Will, I never thought this would happen to me. And lo and behold, I was part of a layoff, or there's downsizing, or, a lot of people take jobs that, are startups that maybe do not get the next round of funding. So these things happen. So it's a matter of, how you combat that. So if you've been laid off and you need extra education, go after a secondary degree, or go after a certification, let's say project management. Maybe you go after a PMP. But these things are really, really important when you get laid off. And then the great thing about 2018 is that, a consultant is not a bad word or an evil word. more and more people are becoming self-employed, and that's just the way it is today. So in a gap on your resume with you can always say you were a consultant and talk about the projects you've worked on.
Yeah. So don't leave it for the interviewer to come up with an explanation. Have a story ready, both on your resume and in your interview conversation that explains what you were doing between formal periods of employment.
That's correct. I mean, it could be even a year. These things happen as you get older in your career, but it's how you explain it, how you prepare, and the positive attitude that you have when you go into that interview.
One thing that surprised me when I was preparing for this interview and reading your materials on this topic, Will, was you singled out that sometimes people get tripped up because they're not able to do the skills that they describe on their resume. And that surprised me. Do you find as a recruiter and in your work with employers that candidates will put things on their resume that they actually can't do?
Yes. I mean, because of keywords and because the way recruiters recruit today, it is not uncommon for somebody to put, a technical skill that they may know little about on their resume. And my suggestion to you is just don't falsify any information. And if it is a technical skill, they're going to have a test that is going to it's going to trip you up. So make sure that what you do is something that you are able to do and that you've done.
Now, sometimes people leave a job because they're unhappy or they've had an unhappy experience, and they may be tempted to talk about that in the first interview. Why, or in later conversations as part of the hiring process, why isn't that a good idea, Will?
Never badmouth your employer. Somewhere down the line, you're going to run into people again. Your career is a journey. So you're going to be with one job for a period of time, and then you're going to do something else. So never burn a bridge. If you do it correctly, you'll never have to look for a job again, because the people in your network and the people that you've influenced and been mentoring, or people that have mentored you, they will help you out again. And in today's world, it is all about networking and who do you know. It's not about if you can do the job, but how can this person connect you to this job? And it is so much easier to do that than to go through a black hole and find a job posting on Indeed. I promise you.
Well, the black hole is a theme that comes up a lot on this show and in our meetings with job seekers. So maybe one day we'll have you back to talk about how to navigate that black hole.
Sure. It's real. And there are also great jobs out there that are not posted. The hidden job market is what they call it. And I love representing companies for those type of roles.
Yeah, that's one of our favorite topics too. Well, but we're drawing to a close, and I do want to hear, Will, what's coming up next for you?
Sure. So Bullseye Recruiting is a recruiting agency. We were formed in 2012, like you said, as a blog, and we did receive some notoriety for what we wrote. And then in 2015, we had turned it into a recruiting agency. So we focus on finding top-tier salespeople throughout the U.S. and globe. We also do find marketing and IT individuals. So next year and the year beyond, we anticipate Bullseye growing quite a bit. And if you're looking to grow your sales staff or to find that dream job, then reach out to me, because I have found the job that I love. And I never thought I would be a recruiter, but 23 years later, I am. And I would love to help you grow your organization or help you as an individual find that dream job.
It's a generous offer. We'll be sure to include links to your website in our show notes. I know that's bullseyerecruiting.net. And in our earlier conversation before the show, I know you encourage people to connect with you on LinkedIn so they can find you there. and we'll include a link to your LinkedIn account as well. Will, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Take care.
All right. Goodbye.
We're back in the Max List studio after my conversation with Will Thomson. What are your thoughts, teammates? What did you think?
I really liked a lot of his advice, and I think that it's really useful to hear from a recruiter who's worked with lots of candidates and heard from employers and sort of like why we chose these people for the second interview versus these people didn't make the cut. And I think it's important to remember that it's not always enough to just do okay in the first interview. Like, oh, it went fine. I'm expecting to get that second interview. Like you do need to go beyond the sort of baseline in order to stand out and earn that second interview.
Yeah. And, be 100% prepared. And
yeah,
I mean, we talk about that all the time, even at the beginning of this episode, talking about being prepared. But it was, like you said, Becky, it's good to hear it from someone who does this on a regular basis, that how actually really important it is.
That's a big part of the reason why I wanted Will on the show, because
he's great, yeah.
Often as candidates, we don't get a lot of feedback, and the recruiter, though, gets a call from the employer, and the employer says, well, this is what I liked about her, this is what my concerns about him, and it's a gift to get that kind of feedback, and sadly, we often don't get that from employers. So even getting it secondhand through somebody like Will, who has those conversations all the time, is valuable.
And I think that there's, I don't know, maybe not everybody is as optimistic as I am, but I always go into it thinking like, oh yeah, I did great. And, there's only a couple other people interviewing. But in actuality, there are so many other people that are going for the same job. And so it's not just you can be the best that you can be, but you have to be the best out of, your peers as well, which is stressful, but it's just, you have to find the right fit for you.
Yeah. But through preparation and homework, you can make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ben, what are your thoughts?
I think that's a lovely watch you have on, Mac.
Oh, full circle.
That's a great question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, thank you all. And thank you, Will, for joining us this week as our guest expert. And thank you, our listeners, for downloading today's episode of Find Your Dream Job. If you like what you hear, please sign up for our free weekly newsletter. In every issue, we give you the key points of that week's show. And we also include links to all the resources mentioned, as well as a transcript of the full episode. If you subscribe to the newsletter now, we'll send you our new guide, the Top Career Podcasts of 2017. Discover all the podcasts that can help you find a great job and get the career you want. Get your free newsletter and podcast guide today. Go to maxlist.org/Top Career Podcasts 2017. And join us next Wednesday when our special guest will be Kevin Kermis. He'll explain how to overcome ageism in your job search. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.